everyone, welcome back for another deep dive.
Right.
Today we're going to be taking a look at Atomic Habits by James Clear.
Oh, yeah, this is a good one.
It is a good one. It's I feel like it's one of those books that kind of fundamentally changed how a lot of people think about habits.
Absolutely.
And how to actually build good habits, break bad habits.
Yeah, and it's one of those books that's really stood the test of time.
Yeah.
You know, it came out, I think, in 2018.
Mm-hmm.
And the principles in it are really timeless.
Totally. And it's still one of those books that's, recommended constantly.
Yeah.
So we thought it was a really good one to kind of take a deep dive into.
Yeah.
And I guess one of the first things that really stood out to me when I first read this book was just the idea that, you don't have to make these massive changes to see big results.
Yeah, small changes add up over time,
Yeah.
right?
That's like the whole compound effect thing.
Yeah.
But he really breaks it down in a way that, I think is really easy to understand and apply.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I thought was interesting was this idea of the plateau of latent potential.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if you remember this in the book.
Of course.
But it's basically that you might be putting in the effort.
Mm-hmm.
You might be building these habits.
Yeah.
But you don't see the results right away.
Right. It's like you're putting in work, but it seems like nothing's happening.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden you hit this tipping point and everything changes.
Yeah, he kind of compares it to an ice cube melting.
Right.
Where it's you're applying heat.
Yeah.
But it's not until it reaches a certain temperature that it actually starts to melt.
Exactly. And that's one of the things that I think can be so discouraging for people when they're trying to build new habits is that they don't see results immediately.
Yeah.
And so they give up.
Right.
But Clear's point is stick with it.
Yeah.
Trust the process. Those small changes are working even if you don't see the results yet.
Yeah. And it's almost like you have to have that faith that okay, I'm putting in the work. Even though I'm not seeing the results yet,
Mm-hmm.
I just have to trust that eventually it's going to hit that tipping point.
Yep. And that's where the whole idea of identity-based habits comes in.
Yeah.
Right?
Let's talk about that because that's a big one.
It is a big one. So Clear argues that real lasting change isn't about just setting goals or making plans. It's about shifting your identity.
Mm-hmm.
It's about who you believe you are at your core.
Right.
Right? So for example, if you want to lose weight, it's not enough to just say, I want to lose 10 pounds. You need to start seeing yourself as a healthy person, someone who makes healthy choices, someone who prioritizes their fitness. Because when your identity aligns with your goals, your habits will naturally follow.
That's such a good point. And he even gives the example of someone who wants more money.
Right.
If their identity is tied to being a spender, no amount of budgeting is going to change that.
Right.
But if they actually start to see themselves as a saver or an investor, then their habits will start to reflect that.
Yeah. And I think that's a really powerful concept because it's not just about willpower.
Right.
It's about aligning your actions with the person you want to become.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things I love about Clear's writing is he uses all these really memorable phrases and quotes.
Oh, yeah. He's great at that.
And one that really stuck with me is each time you write a page, you are a writer.
Right.
You embody that identity through those consistent actions.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a really empowering way to think about building habits.
Totally. And speaking of actions, that's where the habit loop comes in.
Yeah, the habit loop, the foundation.
So break this down for us. What is the habit loop all about?
All right, so the habit loop is basically a 4-stage cycle that explains how habits are formed and how they work. So the 4 stages are cue, craving, response, and reward. So it starts with a cue.
Mm-hmm.
Which is basically a trigger that tells your brain to initiate a behavior.
Okay.
So that cue could be anything. It could be a time of day. It could be a location. It could be an emotion. It could be another person.
It could be your phone buzzing.
Exactly. Your phone buzzing.
Yeah.
You see a notification. And then that cue triggers a craving.
Okay.
Which is the motivation to act. It's the desire for a change in state.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, if you see a notification on your phone, the craving might be to check your phone to see what the notification is.
To get that little dopamine hit.
Exactly, to get that little dopamine hit.
Yeah.
And then the craving leads to the response, which is the actual habit itself.
Okay.
So the response to seeing the notification on your phone is to pick up your phone and check it.
Right.
And then finally, the response leads to a reward, which is the end goal of the habit. It's the thing that satisfies the craving and reinforces the entire cycle.
Okay.
So in the case of checking your phone, the reward might be the satisfaction of seeing what the notification is or the entertainment you get from whatever you're checking on your phone.
Right, or the feeling of connection, if it was a message from a friend or something. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So basically, our brains are wired for this, like, cue, craving, response, reward cycle.
Yes, and one of the key takeaways from the habit loop is that our brains are prediction machines. They're constantly scanning for cues and trying to anticipate outcomes based on past experiences.
Okay, so it's like those experienced chess players who can see patterns and anticipate their opponent's moves way in advance because they've trained their brains to recognize those cues.
Exactly. Or think about a doctor who's been practicing for years. They can pick up on subtle cues that might signal a particular diagnosis.
Oh, wow.
Things that a less experienced doctor might miss entirely. Their brains have been wired to see those patterns through years of practice and feedback.
That's really cool. I never thought about it like that.
Yeah.
But it kind of makes sense.
Yeah, it's fascinating how our brains work.
Yeah, so basically our habits are kind of like these little mental shortcuts that our brains have developed to automate our behavior.
Exactly, and that can be a good thing when those habits are serving us. But it can also be a bad thing when those habits are holding us back.
That's true. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
But then how do we kind of if we are running on this autopilot, how do we break free from those bad habits?
That's where self-awareness comes in.
Okay.
Right? So you need to shine a light on those unconscious patterns that are driving your behavior. And Clear offers a couple of simple tools for this, like the habit scorecard, where you literally just list out all your habits, good and bad.
So it's like taking inventory of your actions throughout the day, seeing where you're spending your time and energy.
Exactly. It helps you identify those unconscious patterns that you might not even realize are influencing your behavior.
Right. Okay, that makes sense. And then there's the pointing and calling technique, which sounds a little strange.
It does sound a little strange.
But I remember from the book, it's surprisingly effective.
It is. So it's a technique that's borrowed from Japanese railway workers. And they actually point and call out each action they take.
Really?
Even the most mundane ones.
Wow.
To maintain this heightened level of awareness and reduce errors.
That's so interesting.
It might seem silly.
Yeah.
But it forces you to be present and pay attention to what you're doing, which can be incredibly powerful in breaking those autopilot habits.
So it's almost like slowing down and really being mindful of each action that you're taking.
Exactly.
Interesting. Okay, so we've kind of gone through the foundation of atomic habits. We've talked about the power of small changes, the plateau of latent potential, the importance of identity-based habits, and then the habit loop.
Yep, that's a good foundation.
Yeah, and all of these little techniques that he has for developing self-awareness. So now that we kind of have that baseline, what are some of the actual strategies that he gives for changing our habits?
No, there are so many good ones in this book. But I think one of the most practical and effective ones is the idea of implementation intentions.
Okay, yeah, I remember that one. Let's dig into that.
All right, so implementation intentions are all about getting super specific with your plans. So instead of saying, I'm going to work out more this week, you say, I'm going to go to the gym on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 7 a.m.
So you remove all the ambiguity?
Exactly. You remove the guesswork. You create a clear action plan.
You pre-commit to the when and the where.
Exactly.
I remember he actually cited a study in the book where the group that planned their exercise time and location had significantly higher exercise adherence.
Way higher.
Than those who didn't.
It's the power of planning.
Yeah. It's crazy how much of a difference it makes.
It really is.
Just to actually plan it out.
Yeah.
So that's a good one to keep in mind. I feel like for anybody who's trying to build any kind of habit, get specific.
Yeah.
With when and where you're going to do it.
Be specific.
Cool. And then what else?
So another great strategy is habit stacking.
Okay. Yeah. I like that one too.
It's brilliant for building new habits. And it's basically about linking a new habit to an existing one.
So, for example, after I make my morning coffee, I'll meditate for 5 minutes, or after I brush my teeth, I'll do 10 push-ups.
Exactly. You're leveraging the momentum of an already established routine to make the new habit easier to stick with.
It's you're already doing this thing.
Yep.
So why not just tack something else onto it?
Exactly.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay. I like that one. And then temptation bundling.
Oh, temptation bundling. That's my favorite.
That one's fun.
It is fun. It's like a little life hack.
It feels like you're kind of cheating the system a little bit.
Yeah, you're kind of gaming your brain.
Yeah.
So with temptation bundling, you pair something you need to do with something you want to do. So for example, I'll only watch my favorite show while I'm on the treadmill.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
Right. So you're essentially injecting some pleasure into the task.
Yeah.
Making it much more likely that you'll actually do it.
That's a great one. I've actually used that one myself.
It works.
It does work.
Yeah.
And all of these strategies that we've talked about so far, they all kind of tie into this bigger idea that Clear talks about, which is that our environment plays a huge role in shaping our habits.
Oh, absolutely.
We're not just creatures of habit. Right. We're creatures of context.
We are.
Like our surroundings are constantly influencing our behavior.
Whether we realize it or not.
Yeah.
And Cleary uses a really powerful example in the book about Vietnam War veterans who struggled with heroin addiction while they were overseas. Mm-hmm. But many of them were able to break the habit when they returned home.
Wow.
Because it was a dramatic shift in environment.
Right.
They were removing all those triggers and cues associated with drug use.
That's such a powerful example.
Yeah.
It's crazy how much our environment can really impact our habits.
It really is. It's not just about willpower. It's about being strategic with our environment and making it work for us.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so what are some other ways that we can kind of like make our environment work for us when it comes to building good habits?
So one of the key principles that Clear emphasizes is making good habits easier and bad habits harder.
Okay, yeah.
He calls this reducing friction.
Right.
And he has this great example, the 2-minute rule.
Oh, yeah, the 2-minute rule. That one's a classic.
It is a classic. And it's all about breaking down habits into their simplest form, making them super easy to start.
So instead of trying to write a whole chapter,
right,
you just focus on writing for 2 minutes.
Exactly. Or instead of cleaning the entire house, you just focus on tidying up for 2 minutes.
Right. It's about removing that initial resistance, that feeling of overwhelm that can prevent us from getting started.
Exactly.
Yeah, because once you've taken that first step,
right,
it's much easier to keep going.
It is. It's all about building momentum.
Yeah, and overcoming that initial inertia.
Yeah.
Okay, I like that one. And then another one that I thought was interesting was commitment devices.
Oh, commitment devices. It's like outsmarting your future self.
Yeah.
Right? So commitment devices are choices that we make in the present to control our actions in the future.
Okay.
It's like Odysseus tying himself to the mast of his ship to resist the siren's call.
Oh, wow. That's a good one.
Right. Or the classic example of Victor Hugo, who locked away all of his clothes except for a shawl so he could focus on writing.
I love that story.
Yeah.
By removing the temptation to go out or engage in other distractions, he forced himself to stay focused on his writing.
He did. It's like setting up guardrails for yourself.
Yeah, that's a good analogy. Okay, so it's basically like anticipating your future weaknesses and putting systems in place to ensure your success.
Exactly. And these days, technology can be a powerful tool for both good and bad habits.
Oh, yeah. It's a double-edged sword for sure.
It is.
We can automate good habits like saving money or tracking our fitness.
Right.
But we can also fall prey to like the endless scroll of social media or binge watching.
Oh, absolutely.
So it's really about being intentional with how we use technology.
It is Clear actually experimented with this himself. He locked himself out of social media for a week. And he was surprised by how quickly he adapted and how much more focused he became on meaningful work.
Wow, that's really interesting. It's a good reminder that like we often have more control over our technology than we think.
You do.
It's about being intentional with our digital environment and setting boundaries that support our goals.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've talked about a lot of different strategies for like making good habits easier, bad habits harder, using our environment to our advantage.
Yeah.
But even with all of these things in place, we still need to find ways to make those habits satisfying.
We do. Especially in the beginning.
Right. Because if it's not enjoyable, why are we going to keep doing it?
Exactly. That brings us to the fourth law of behavior change. Make it satisfying.
Okay. Yeah.
So while the ultimate reward of a good habit should be the habit itself, we often need some immediate reinforcement to keep us motivated, especially in those early stages.
Right. And that's where habit tracking comes in.
Yes. Habit tracking is a powerful tool. It provides visual cues, it tracks our progress, and it adds a little bit of immediate satisfaction to the process.
It's like those old school paperclip strategies.
Right.
You move a clip from one jar to another each time you complete a task.
Exactly. It's a simple but surprisingly effective way to make progress tangible and boost motivation.
Yeah, I've definitely used that one before. It's like you can actually see your progress.
Yeah, you can see it.
It's not just like this abstract thing in your head.
Exactly.
But Clear also cautions against becoming too fixated on the numbers.
He does. He talks about Goodhart's law.
What is that?
Which basically states that when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure.
Oh, that's interesting.
Right, so it's about using those measurements as feedback, not letting them become the ultimate goal.
Right. We need to remember the bigger picture. Yeah. Why are we building these habits in the first place?
Exactly.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's easy to get caught up in the metrics and lose sight of the underlying purpose.
It is. And speaking of staying on track, Clear highlights the importance of accountability.
Oh yeah, accountability is huge.
It is. It's amazing how much more likely we are to stick with something when we know someone else is watching.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
Like if I tell someone I'm going to do something, I'm way more likely to actually do it.
Absolutely. And Clear talks about how social consequences can strengthen our habits. And he introduces this concept of a habit contract.
Oh, yeah. What is a habit contract?
It's basically a formal agreement that outlines your commitments and the consequences for not following through.
Okay. So it's like you write it down, you make it official.
Exactly. And it's even more effective when you involve accountability partners who can help you stay on track.
Yeah. Like having someone to check in with can make a big difference.
You can. He shares a great example in the book of an entrepreneur who used a habit contract for weight loss.
Oh, wow.
With escalating consequences for missed targets.
So it's like if you miss your target 1 week, then something happens.
Something happens.
And if you miss it again the next week,
the consequences get worse.
Okay. That sounds intense.
It is intense.
But I can see how it would be effective.
It is for some people. It's about leveraging that social pressure for positive change.
Right.
Okay, so we've talked about how to make habits easier, more attractive, how to make ourselves accountable. But with so many potential habits to choose from, how do we know which ones to focus on?
Right. Like, where do we even start?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And it brings us to the explore-exploit trade-off.
The explore-exploit trade-off. What is that?
So it's about finding that sweet spot between trying new things and focusing on what works best for you.
So it's like balancing exploration and exploitation.
Exactly.
We need to experiment and try different things, but at some point we need to double down on the habits that are most beneficial.
Precisely. And when it comes to exploiting our strengths, Clear has a really interesting perspective on success.
Okay, tell me about it.
So he suggests that sometimes winning isn't about being better, it's about being different.
Oh, that's interesting.
Right. So instead of trying to be the best at something that everyone else is already doing, find a unique combination of skills that sets you apart.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
He uses Scott Adams as an example, right?
He does, the creator of Dilbert.
Yep.
And Adams himself says he's not the best artist or the funniest writer, but the combination of those skills along with his business background makes his work unique and successful.
Yeah. So it's about finding that niche.
It is.
That unique blend of talents and interests.
Exactly. And that's really encouraging.
It is.
Because it means you don't have to be the absolute best in any one area to achieve remarkable results.
Right. You just have to be good at a few things.
And combine them in a unique way.
Right. Combine them. Yeah, exactly. Okay. So we found those habits that align with our strengths and our goals. Now, how do we stay motivated? Especially when that initial excitement wears off.
Motivation, the million-dollar question.
All right.
So Clear debunks the myth of endless motivation by sharing a story about an Olympic coach who said, motivation is crap. If you need motivation to do something, you're screwed. The key is showing up, even when you don't feel like it.
That's a great quote.
It is. Right.
It's so true. Even the most successful people experience those days where they just don't feel like it.
They do.
The difference is they've developed the discipline to push through those feelings and show up anyway.
Exactly.
And to help with that, Clear talks about the power of variable rewards. Variable rewards. What are those?
So think about slot machines.
Okay.
People keep pulling the lever because they don't know when they'll win.
Right.
And that unpredictability keeps them engaged.
Oh, so it's that element of surprise?
Yes. The anticipation.
That keeps it interesting.
Yeah, it makes it addictive.
Yeah.
So we can introduce that element of variability into our routines to keep things fresh.
Okay, so it's like switching up your workout routine, trying a new recipe, exploring a different walking path. Okay, and then there's the Goldilocks rule.
The Goldilocks rule. This one's important.
Tell me about it.
So the Goldilocks rule is about finding that sweet spot of challenge.
Okay.
Right? If something's too easy, we get bored. If it's too hard, we get discouraged.
Right.
But if it's just the right level of difficulty,
yeah.
we enter that flow state where we're fully engaged and motivated.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So it's about like pushing ourselves just enough to keep growing without becoming overwhelmed.
Exactly.
Okay. And then finally, to ensure that we're continuously improving.
Right.
Clear emphasizes the importance of reflection and review.
Reflection is key.
Yeah.
It's so easy to just go through the motions, but taking the time to reflect on our habits helps us make adjustments and stay on track.
It's like that saying, insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results.
Exactly.
And so as we kind of like start to wrap up this deep dive, is there anything else from the book that you think would be really valuable to highlight for our listeners?
Yeah, I think one of the things that Clear touches on throughout the book that I think is really important is this idea that building good habits isn't just about achieving external goals. It's also about creating a life that feels fulfilling and meaningful.
Right. It's about like that internal transformation as well.
Exactly. And he has this really thought-provoking idea that happiness is the space between one desire being fulfilled and a new desire forming.
Oh, that's interesting.
Right. So it's this constant cycle of wanting and liking.
It's like we need desire to initiate a behavior.
Right.
But then we need pleasure and satisfaction to sustain it.
Exactly.
So it's like finding that balance.
It is. It's about finding that sweet spot where you're constantly challenging yourself, but also enjoying the process.
Right. And like allowing yourself to celebrate those wins along the way.
Absolutely, because that's what keeps you going.
Yeah, it's like that positive reinforcement loop.
Exactly.
Okay, so I think that's a really good point to kind of like bring this all together. Atomic habits. It's about understanding how habits work.
Yeah.
And using that knowledge to create a life that is not only successful, but also fulfilling.
Exactly. It's about designing a life that you love.
Yeah, and that you're excited to wake up to every day.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, I think this has been a really insightful deep dive.
It has.
Into atomic habits.
Lots of great takeaways.
So much good stuff in there. So to kind of wrap things up for our listeners, what is one small habit, one tiny action that someone could take today that could potentially have a big impact on their life a year from now?
I think one of the simplest but most powerful habits that anyone can start is just to read for 10 minutes every day.
Okay, yeah, I love that one.
Right, you don't have to read for hours.
Right.
Just 10 minutes.
Just a little bit each day.
A little bit each day, and over time, those 10 minutes will add up. You'll be amazed at how much knowledge you acquire.
And how much it can actually change your perspective on things.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's a great one. What about you? Is there another habit that you would recommend?
Yeah, I would say start a daily gratitude practice.
Ooh, I like that one too.
Right. So every day, just take a few minutes to think about 3 things that you're grateful for. It could be anything big or small.
Just anything that's bringing you joy.
Exactly. And this simple practice can have a profound impact on your happiness and well-being.
Yeah, it's like shifting your focus to the positive.
Exactly.
Instead of dwelling on the negative. Okay, I love that one. So we've got reading for 10 minutes every day.
Yep.
Starting a daily gratitude practice. Any other small habits that our listeners could try?
I would say make your bed every morning.
Oh, that's a good one.
It's such a small thing.
It is.
But it sets the tone for the day.
It's like that sense of accomplishment.
Exactly.
Right off the bat.
It makes you feel like you're already winning.
Yeah, I like that. Okay, so there you have it, folks. 3 simple but powerful habits that you can start today to start building a better life.
One small step at a time.
One atom at a time.
Exactly.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into Atomic Habits by James Clear.
It was a pleasure.
We hope you enjoyed it. And we'll see you next time for another exploration of the ideas that shape our world.